Hi, I'm Talia Baroncelli, and you're watching theAnalysis-news. I'll shortly be joined by international lawyer Francis Boyle to speak about South Africa's recent filing before the International Court of Justice, charging Israel with committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. If you'd like to support the work that we do, you can do so by going to our website, theAnalysis.news, hitting the donate button at the top right corner of the screen. And if you want to stay up to date with all of our content and shows, you can get onto our mailing list and also like and subscribe to our show on YouTube as well as on Spotify and Apple if you listen to your podcast there. See you in a bit with Francis Boyle. Joining me now is Professor Francis Boyle. He's a renowned international lawyer and professor of international law at the University of Illinois College of Law. He has years of experience working on cases of genocide and crimes against humanity and successfully applied the Genocide Convention against the former Yugoslavia for its genocide of Bosnians in Prijedor and Srebrenica. So thank you so much for making time and joining me today, Professor Boyle.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, and my best to your audience. And yes, just for the purpose of this discussion, I want to make it clear that on 8 April 1993, I won a massive, overwhelming order for the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina against Yugoslavia to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Bosnians. This was the first judgment ever won from the World Court on the basis of the Genocide Convention. And then on 13 September 1993, I won a second massive, overwhelming order for Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina against Yugoslavia to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Bosnians. And then previously on August 8th, I had won what is known as a second-level World Court order from the president of the court exercising the powers of the court to the same effect. So this is the first time ever that one lawyer or government had won two orders in one case since the World Court was founded in 1921. And then you add in the secondary order as well. So I have three orders there on genocide.
Well, that's very impressive, and I'll ask you a bit more about that later, especially with regards to Slobodan Milosevic, because I believe you were also involved in cases against him. I don't know if that was the same case or...
Well, that is correct. And I guess that is important here, too, because I was the lawyer for the mothers of Srebrenica and Predrina, the women who survived the massacre at Srebrenica, and I convinced the prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia to indict Yugoslav president for almost every crime in the ICTY statute, including 2 counts of genocide. One for genocide against Bosnia in general, and the second for genocide against Srebrenica in particular. He was put on trial in The Hague. At the close of the prosecution's case, he filed a motion to dismiss all charges. The tribunal denied that motion on the grounds that the prosecutor had produced enough evidence to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt on all charges, including the 2 counts of genocide, and therefore he should proceed with his defense, whereupon he died. So there was no final judgment against him.
Well, we will discuss the Bosnian case of genocide, but why don't we turn to South Africa's recent filing before the International Court of Justice? So South Africa filed an interim measure or a cease and desist order charging Israel with violating its obligations under the 1948 Genocide Convention, to which it is a signatory. And the 84-page document, which was submitted by South Africa, a very impressive document, states, and I'll just read a quick section of it, I quote, "The acts and omissions by Israel complained of by South Africa are genocidal in character because they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian national, racial, and ethnical group, that being a part of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. The acts in question include killing Palestinians in Gaza, causing them serious bodily harm and mental harm, inflicting on them conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction." End quote. So in response to this, Israel has called the charges blood libel. They've said that the charges are baseless. And of course, the U.S. has responded similarly. Admiral John Kirby from the National Security Council has said that the case is completely meritless and counterproductive, as if he's judge, jury, and executioner all in one person. But of course, he's not. He's not a court. So how do you assess this particular case on its merit? Do you think that the merits of the case will lead it to be successful?
Yes, their application requests for provisional measures of protection were about the same length as mine were, 90 pages or something like that. And based on my knowledge, judgment, and experience in winning these three orders, I predict South Africa will win a temporary restraining order, preliminary injunction against Israel to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Palestinians. Yes, I've been through this before. And in fact, the South African government papers are a lot better than mine. You see, in my case, I was handling this matter pro bono publico, eating my own expenses, and I was the only lawyer on the case. You have to understand that. So I put together all those documents by myself and within a week. Whereas here, in the case of South Africa, you have an entire team of first-rate international lawyers who have put these documents together. So if I could win with my documents, they could certainly win, and they will win with their documents that were a lot better than mine.
Right. Well, what would you say are the main elements of committing genocide? I mean, we saw the genocide, for example, in Rwanda, and unfortunately, before the international community acted, the genocide had already taken place. But this is quite the opposite. It seems if genocide is taking place, it seems like it is currently taking place and that it's ongoing. So maybe you can explain what the elements of that are.
Yes, in the case of the Bosnians, the genocide was ongoing too. You could watch it on CNN Live every day. Here, there would be two main elements of the application of the request. The first is the specific intent to commit genocide. If you read the application and request, you will see that the South African legal team has compiled all the genocidal statements made by Israeli government officials and pleading it against them. I did the exact same thing for Bosnia. I took all the genocidal statements made by Yugoslav officials, including Milosevic, and filed them and pleaded them with the World Court. These are basically admissions against interest. They bind the government. So I think the case is there and established. Indeed, I believe since December 29, you now have an Israeli official saying that Gaza should be reduced to Auschwitz. Well, we all know what happened at Auschwitz. 2 million human beings were exterminated, many of them Jews. So we see a Nazi mentality here at work on the part of Israeli officials. I argue the same thing with respect to the Yugoslav officials, a Nazi mentality. We have to understand that the Genocide Convention originated out of the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews. Second, acts of genocide. And here, if you read the application, you will see they have 4 different counts against Israel under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention? A, killing members of the group. Well, right now, if you count all the dead Palestinians under the rubble, we're approaching probably 30,000. But even if you take the Gaza Health Ministry, 22,000. Well, the World Court ruled in the final judgment in the Bosnia case that even 7,000 dead Bosnian Muslim boys and men at Srebrenica were enough to constitute genocide. And remember, I got Milosevic indicted for that. So here we're dealing with 3 to 4 multiples of the dead at Srebrenica that have already been determined to be genocide. Second, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. As for bodily harm, the last figure I saw, maybe 40,000 wounded, physically wounded Palestinians. Mental harm, well, just turn on any of the even Zionist-dominated news media, and you can see the pain and the suffering of the Palestinians there. And I should point out, all the American news media are Zionist-dominated and controlled. You know, the anchors, the owners, the funders, the pundits, the commentators, etc. And the same is true for the BBC. But even that, the pain and anguish of the Palestinians comes through. Third count, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Well, we have the Israeli minister, which, by the way, South Africa has put in there, saying that there will be no food, no water, no fuel, no medical supplies, no nothing in Gaza. And now we have this recent statement that Gaza should be reduced to Auschwitz. So they have a compelling case there. The fourth count, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Yes, here we have tens of thousands of pregnant Palestinian women giving birth to children. There are no hospitals around for this to assist them and care for them and their babies. Ambulances to get them to hospitals have been destroyed. And we have a minimum of 4,000 dead Palestinian children, perhaps up to 5,000. I don't have the exact figure now. I argue the same thing for the Bosnians, that the mass rape of the Bosnian women, they were all my clients, 40,000 raped women, were measures intended to prevent births within the group, in the sense that a Bosnian Serb male who raped a Bosnian Muslim woman would, under South Slavic custom and law, that baby is considered to be Serb and not Muslim. So I've argued that and won that too at the World Court. So, if you add up the facts and the intent, the specific intent, that explains my conclusion that South Africa will win this order. And the hearing is next Thursday and Friday. I suspect the order will come down within about a week to 10 days. In the Bosnia case, I argued the case April 1 and 2. I won my order equally. So I believe they will be expeditious in production of this order.
Well, usually it's really difficult to prove a genocide case because you have to prove that there's actually genocidal intent, so intent to commit acts of genocide. But the South African filing has 6 pages worth of Israeli officials openly calling for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, for the destruction of their livelihoods, destruction of civilian infrastructure, saying that they'll turn Gaza into a parking lot. The one statement you were referring to saying that they wanted to turn Gaza into Auschwitz was, I believe, made by a local mayor in the north of Israel. But of course, Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, as well as Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, have made all sorts of comments openly, not just in Israeli media in Hebrew, but also in English-speaking media, and then making posts online on Twitter. Ben-Gvir recently said that he wanted to ensure that Palestinians would emigrate from the Gaza Strip, and Matt Miller from the State Department said that these statements were completely uncalled for. There was an exchange there online, and Matt Miller said, well, what he's saying, what Ben-Gvir is saying is actually in contradiction of Israeli government policy, which doesn't really make any sense given that Ben-Gvir is a member of the Israeli government, the ruling government right now. So that doesn't really fly or make any sense. But given that if this particular case is successful and that the ICJ is able to perhaps lead to or call upon a ceasefire, how would this particular case implicate the United States, given that they've been providing weapons and aid to Israel?
Yes, if you look at the Genocide Convention, Article 3E criminalizes complicity in genocide. And the United States government is a party to the Genocide Convention. It is clear the United States has violated Article 3E, complicit in genocide, aiding and abetting Israel's genocide against the Palestinians. As you know, we've provided them with all the weapons, equipment, supplies, funding, political support at the Security Council, threatening vetoes, etc. Second, we have here in the United States what is known as the United States Genocide Implementation Act that also makes this criminal. And this is led by friends at the Center for Constitutional Rights and the National Lawyers Guild to file a lawsuit in federal court out in the Bay Area against Biden, Blinken, and Austin for aiding and abetting Israeli genocide against the Palestinians in violation of both the Genocide Convention and the Genocide Convention Implementation Act. So that case is now proceeding in court. I'm not involved in it, but of course I follow it. And this World Court order finding cease and desist against Israel will help in those proceedings, yes.
Well, are you worried at all that the president of the International Court of Justice, Joan Donoghue, is a previous or a former U.S. State Department official, and that she might in some way shape the proceedings in Israel's favor?
Yes, of course. She's a career-long State Department apparatchik and legal hatchet person. I won't go through the history here, but that's how and why she was put on the court in the first place, to do dirty work for the United States government. I am sure that since this lawsuit has filed, that she's been in communication with the United States government about the backroom maneuvers and everything else going on there at the World Court, and is using her powers as president of the court to at least shape the proceedings. The president does have the president I dealt with, Jennings from Britain, did what he could to sabotage my lawsuit. He was working in cahoots with the British government. He used to be a British government lawyer. Yes, she won't be able to stop it or sabotage it, I think, but she's certainly going to try to shape it in favor of Israel, working in cahoots with the United States government, yes. And I suspect her opinion when it comes out will basically track whatever the Israelis are saying, whatever the State Department position is. This happened in the Nicaragua case, where the American judge Schwabel was just like Donoghue, a career-long State Department apparatchik and legal hatchet person put on there for that reason. and all of his opinions in the Nicaragua case, are basically written by the State Department. The difference at that time, Schwebel was not the president of the court. So, yes, this is a problem. The Republic of South Africa just nominated a judge ad hoc, a very distinguished jurist, and he can participate in the activities here as a full-fledged judge. So I certainly hope that he will do the best he can against Donahue. Yes.
Well, both Israel and the United States are signatories to the 1948 Genocide Convention. There are 153 signatories. So what would you say are the actual real concrete ramifications of South Africa's case being successful? I mean, would this lead potentially to a ceasefire, or what would the legal ramifications or repercussions of that be?
South Africa has asked for a ceasefire. I think they'll get it. But to give you an idea, after I won my massive, overwhelming order for the Bosnians on 8 April 1993, I walked out of the grand courtroom for the court at the Peace Palace in The Hague. There's a foyer out there, and the whole world news media was there. And holding my order in front of the news media at all times, right in front of them, I said, look here, the World Court has just determined that genocide is going on. They've issued a cease and desist order against Yugoslavia. They obviously are not going to cease and desist under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. Every party to the Genocide Convention has an obligation to prevent and stop the genocide, the Yugo genocide against the Bosnians. And therefore, I am calling for direct military intervention by all parties to the Genocide Convention to save the Bosnians from the Yugo genocide. A few hours later, it was announced in Washington, D.C., and NATO headquarters in Brussels that the United States and NATO were instituting an air interdiction zone again over Bosnia, that they would shoot down any Yugo jets, airplanes, helicopters, whatever. So the Yugos could no longer exterminate the Bosnians from the sky. So there could be quite severe consequences for Israel. Second, South Africa then, when it wins the order, will take it to the Security Council for enforcement. That is the way the United Nations Charter sets it up. The court, it's like any other court. You go into court, you win a judgment. The judges don't enforce the judgment. You take it to the sheriff. And under the UN Charter, the sheriff is the Security Council. Right now, it seems to me that the United States government would veto any enforcement measure by the Security Council against Israel. This exact same thing happened in the Nicaragua case. Nicaragua took its order against the United States to the Security Council. The U.S. vetoed any action on the basis. But this time it is different in that South Africa then can take this order in the event of the veto to the UN General Assembly for enforcement there. And the consequences for Israel could be quite severe. Let me run through them. First, the UN General Assembly could suspend Israel from participation in its activities. The General Assembly did the exact same thing to the criminal apartheid regime in South Africa and the genocidal Yugoslavia, my former adversary. Second, the UN General Assembly can admit Palestine as a full-fledged UN member state. Right now, Palestine is recognized de jure by 139 states as a state and has observer state status in the United Nations along the lines that Switzerland had before it became a full-fledged UN member state. If Palestine were to become a full-fledged UN member state, historically, no UN member state has ever been destroyed. Two have collapsed, Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, but they've never been destroyed. And so it's clear Israel and the Zionists want to destroy Palestine and inflict a second Nakba on the Palestinians. If they get UN membership, the UN would be obliged to keep them alive. So in the Bosnia case, they tried, the UN and the European Union tried to steal Bosnia's membership in the UN to destroy them. I stopped that myself. It never happened. Bosnia is still there today, despite 200,000 dead Bosnians, 3/4 of the country overrun by a gang of genocidal maniacs, and 40,000 raped Bosnian women. Bosnia is still there. It's still a UN member state. Third, the UN General Assembly can create an international criminal tribunal for Israel along the lines of the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia under its powers of Article 22 of the UN Charter as a subsidiary organ. I started an initiative to that effect in the UN General Assembly. It was supported and sponsored by Malaysia and Iran and large numbers of Arab and Muslim states. It was sabotaged by the usual suspects at that time. I would hope if South Africa wins this order, they will revisit my initiative for an international criminal tribunal for Israel. If that is set up, they can start prosecuting the highest level officials of the Israeli government and military for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Finally, the economic sanctions can be recommended by the General Assembly to the member states under the Uniting for Peace resolution. If you're following it today, as you know, North Korea suffers from terrible economic sanctions. I don't support that. But those sanctions are still in effect today, 2024, go back to a Uniting for Peace resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly imposing those sanctions. So sanctions can be, quite effective. What South Africa does with this order is for the Republic of South Africa. I do not advise that government. I did work for pro bono work for the ANC during the struggle against the criminal apartheid regime, but my contacts there in the government are gone. That was a while ago. But I have advised the Palestinians of all these measures that could be taken on their behalf by South Africa. So they're fully aware of these consequences for Israel. What they work out, South Africa and Palestine, and a 2/3 vote in the General Assembly, I really don't know. Understand they're dealing with the 800-pound gorilla of the world. That's the United States. And then Israel, they're up against Israel, very powerful, and all the Zionist forces in the world. So it's different from the situation that confronted me with the Bosnians. I had the entire world behind me when I was representing the Bosnians, except Yugoslavia and Russia, who supported them. Everyone else supported me. But here the politics are quite different. The South Africa and the Palestinians are up against the United States, Israel, Britain, several European states, and Zionist forces, media, everything else, all over the world. So it's going to be a much more difficult battle than what confronted me.
I do have a follow-up question, though, going back to the 90s and the NATO bombing, which, as you say, it didn't prevent the genocide from taking place in Srebrenica, but perhaps it put an end to it. I'm not entirely sure.
Srebrenica led to the NATO bombing in Bosnia. Yes, the U.S., the Clinton administration, the British were so appalled by the Srebrenica massacre that it led to the bombing, right?
Right, and there are many reports that the UN wasn't really heeding the warning signs and the calls for help from people in Srebrenica or surrounding that.
Well, the UN knew exactly what was going on. That is why I tried to get the highest level officials of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali and Kofi Annan, indicted by the ICTY. But I wasn't able to do that. I could get Slobodan Milosevic indicted, but not the UN officials. No, the UN knew full well what was going on.
But you did say that the NATO bombing was a sort of, I guess, political outcome in a way of the determination that genocide was taking place. But it wasn't necessarily inevitable. I mean, I guess, was there anything that really, by, I guess, the international legal system and the UN system of bodies of law, was there anything there that could have been enforced to deal with the forces of Radovan Karadzic and the other Republic of Serbia?
Well, that's what happened. They were bombed. Under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, the obligation to prevent genocide, the United States and all the NATO states were parties. And in addition, the Bosnian president, acting pursuant to my advice, sent a formal request to President Clinton for military intervention. I drafted the letter under Article 51 of the UN Charter, Collective Self-Defense, and the Genocide Convention, and the World Court Order that I won, and I faxed it into the White House and into the Situation Room at the State Department. So there was a formal request under international law, under Article 51 of the Charter, under the Genocide Convention, and under my order that I won for such military intervention. Yes.
Okay. And just one final question, if you have time. The International Criminal Court is a separate court. It's separate from the International Court of Justice, as the International Court of Justice is the UN court, whereas the International Criminal Court is a separate court, which was established in, I believe it was 2001. And there have been cases brought to the ICC, and there's the case pending right now to look at crimes committed by Hamas as well as crimes committed by Israel in Gaza, but it seems like the prosecutor is dragging his feet. Why is that? Is that because Israel and the U.S. are not signatories to the Rome Statute, which governs the International Criminal Court?
You are perfectly correct. Back in 2009, right after the end of Israel's so-called Operation Cast Lead against Gaza, I advised the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which he did do for Palestine. And since 2009, the International Criminal Court has not lifted one finger to help the Palestinians. Not one finger since 2009. That's been 15 years. And so all the death and destruction and the blood of the Palestinians since 2009 are on the hands of the International Criminal Court. If they had started indicting Israeli leaders in 2009, maybe all this could have been prevented. That was my intention in advising President Abbas to accept their jurisdiction. So the ICC is a rotten, corrupt, despicable organization. And again, they haven't lifted one finger to help the Palestinians and the 30,000 dead Palestinians, 40,000 wounded, 4,000 to 5,000 dead children. It's all on their heads, right? Every one of them.
Well, Professor Francis Boyle, it was great speaking to you. Let's hope that South Africa will be successful. We'll find out soon, I guess. I mean, the proceedings will be on January 11th and 12th, and then think you said that within a week there will be a determination. So let's hope that they're successful and that something comes out of this. I mean, so many countries have called for a ceasefire. I mean, numerous countries in the General Assembly, for example, 153 signed on to the resolution to call for a ceasefire. And unfortunately, that hasn't brought anything because of the US and Israel's position. So let's hope that this case before the ICJ will have a positive effect.
It will trigger the Genocide Convention and the obligation to prevent genocide. Right. And that was my intention in filing that lawsuit for the Bosnians. And it made all the difference. Right.
Thank you so much, Professor Boyle. And thank you for watching theAnalysis.news. If you'd like to contribute to our show, you can do so by going to our website, theAnalysis.news, and hitting the donate button at the top right corner of the screen.